The following program contains topical discussions related to suicide. If you are feeling suicidal or need help for yourself or someone you know, please dial 988 in the U.S. or contact your local mental health services. Losing someone to suicide begins a painful struggle to make sense of an often unexplainable tragedy. Joining our conversation today is Brandy Lidbeck, author and speaker who will be sharing about her journey, as well as helping others through theirs. That's coming up right here on the Hope Debrief. Welcome to the Hope Debrief, a suicide bereavement caretaker conversation. I'm your host, Robbie Graham, and joining me once again is my lovely wife and co-host, Denise Graham.
Hello, everyone.
So today we are having a conversation with Brandy Lidbeck. She is a licensed marriage and family therapist and the author of the book, The Gift of Second, Healing from the Impact of Suicide. Brandy, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Brandy, for being here. It's good to see you.
Good to see you guys.
So, Brandy, Robbie talked a little bit in your introduction about what you do and who you are. I'd love to hear more, though. I want to hear a little bit maybe about your family, about your work with lost teams. Can you share a little bit more with us?
Sure. I live in California. My husband and I have 3 kiddos, which keep us very, very busy. And I have been involved with lost teams probably since 2018. I started one and ran one for a while, and now I'm more on the lost team consultant side, trying to help other teams throughout the country get their team up and running, and just do trainings for them and kind of help them get started.
That's great. Awesome. Thank you for everything you do. I know you're in at least a couple different states. You still do some work in California. You're doing some work in Montana, but it's exciting when you can really come along beside other people that are passionate about lost teams and postvention. So
Agreed.
Good for you.
Definitely.
Yeah, thanks.
So, Brandy, I'd like to talk a little bit now about your experience with grief. I know you lost your mother when you were 10. Are you able to share some of that and any other, just what your experience has been?
Sure. Like you mentioned, I did lose my mom at 10, and it was such a profound loss. And one that I don't think we were equipped. She died in 1991. I don't think we were equipped, or even society was equipped with resources on how to navigate that loss. My dad certainly, that would be like opening the yellow pages and hoping that a support group popped out. Like it just didn't exist pre-internet. And so we really didn't do anything, and we didn't talk about it at home. We moved shortly after she died, like a month after she died. So all the pictures came off the walls, and they just never went back up. And it was kind of like that was how it was in our family. We just weren't going to talk about it. I think there was a lot of shame and stigma attached to suicide, and so many questions that we just couldn't answer, and so much confusion around who I didn't know anybody else who died by suicide.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I was 23, actually, that a good friend of mine that I didn't know, she said, my dad died by suicide. And that was the first person that I ever met at 23. So 13 years later, that had a suicide in their lives. And I think I hung on to her. She was probably like, she was an adult, like a much older adult, but she was probably like, okay, get away from me. But I was like, I had so many questions of just the, like, you get it. You understand, Nobody else I know does. So.
Yeah, that's so important, that peer support aspect. When you meet somebody else that has a similar experience, not identical ever, but similar, wow, it's powerful.
Yes.
You feel like you're not alone. Oh, somebody might get me. That's great.
Yeah.
Very much so. Now, Brandy, I know we've talked before, and you also had some other losses. Do you mind talking about those a little bit?
Sure. My cousin, he was 30. He was a Army soldier, and he came home from Iraq, and he took his life, unfortunately. And then I had a colleague who did this same work with me, a sweet friend, and she took her life as well in 2021.
It's a lot of loss.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know you wrote the book the gift of second. Can you tell me more about the inspiration of that and the timeline that you wrote that? You've had a lot of loss in your life, and yeah, I'm just curious how that laid out.
Yeah, it's kind of a bizarre story. I was working, I think I was going to a therapy session. In my 20s, I started going to therapy for the first time. So, um, talking about grief and loss and trauma and all that for the first time. And so I was seeing my therapist, and I walked in, and there was one of the rooms in the therapy office had like a sign on it, like suicide loss support group meeting tonight. And I was a licensed therapist at the time. I had no idea that these things even existed, which is a little unsettling. But and I turned to my therapist and said, "What's that?" And she goes, "Oh, they run a group for anyone who's lost someone to suicide," which was baffling also because my therapist knew. You know what I mean? Like, it was just like, how have I never heard of this? So maybe this was a God thing. I don't know. But I picked up the phone the next day and called that support group. I looked them up online. And I just called to say, thank you so much for the work that you're doing for all those individuals. That was literally the entire intention of my phone call. It's just to thank them for people who have like somewhere to turn to. Because I don't need that. But, this was my mind. I don't need that, but I'm so glad that you guys are offering that. And I talked to this lady on the phone, and she said, "Oh, my husband died by suicide and left behind two sons." And she said, "My son has experienced all of this," and kind of started talking about his feelings and feeling not good enough, feeling a lot of shame. Just started saying all of these things that I said, I felt that way my entire life. Your son feels the same way after his dad died? And she said, yeah. And I said, I can't, like, I hung up the phone. I was like, I can't be the only person that's ever had the same exact feelings as this kid. And so it just made me start thinking. So the next day, this is crazy, I started a website and I called it The Gift of Second. And the idea behind it was the gift of going second behind someone who's been there before you. Like, just to kind of speak to the truths that you're now experiencing. And so that's kind of where the gift of second came from. And I started this website and I started talking to people, started interviewing a bunch of people, and everybody had like these same experiences. Like, the losses were all suicide losses, but the circumstances around it were all so different, but yet so common. And the feelings of being left behind, the feelings of trauma, the feeling, whatever it is, everyone's was like the same responses. And it was like kind of talking back to that friend I met, when I was 23, but this was like magnified times like hundreds and thousands of people. And I was like, oh my gosh, where have you been all my life to know that we're living parallel lives in different states, different countries? And so then it kind of just took off, and I started the website and I just kind of shared it, and then it kind of got shared and it got shared. And I thought, maybe if 2 other people read this, it'll be worth it. And like the first week, it was like thousands of people were reading it
That's
and
incredible.
commenting. And I started just started doing blog interviews like this, and it just kind of took off. And then I was like, maybe I'll write a book. And maybe if one other person reads it, and then it's been tens of thousands of copies. So like, it's just kind of been like the resource, I feel like, is we all just needed something, and it kind of, I was able to do my own healing, I think, along that way as well.
I think you bring up a good point with that too, is, being in this space ourselves, is a lot of times we hear the message, and it's a true message of everyone's grief is unique. Everyone's loss is unique. And that is true. But there's also so much commonality that I think sometimes an overemphasis on the uniqueness, we can lose sight of that, there are ways that this is common that we can come together on and really support one another to make it easier then to get support for that uniqueness as well. And we can hold that special. So I think that's a great thing you're talking about. I want to ask you now about your involvement with LOSS teams. And for anyone in our audience who may not know what a LOSS team is, LOSS stands for Local Outreach to Suicide Survivors. And we'll have a link there on the webpage for this episode that you can go to and find out more information. You can also visit lossteam.com. But Brandy, if you would just share a little bit what your experience was like working with LOSS teams, especially after beginning your own grief journey.
Sure. So I have such a soft place in my heart for LOSS teams. I think I always say they're the best part of someone's worst day of their lives. and really kind of just going in. And obviously I mentioned we didn't have any resources as a kiddo, but the idea that we could go into someone's home in their darkest hour and give them resources that we never had, like that's life changing. Frank always talks about I think it's 5 years, 7 years, the average time someone takes to get resources or to go into a therapist's office. And then you move that down with a lost team to 39 days. And I think if someone had walked into my living room that day and said, here's a group for kiddos, here's a story for kids, who ask questions or whatever, that would have been such a game changer, such a change of trajectory. And so my heart has always just been to provide for families that what we never had.
That's awesome. So I know you've done a lot of direct support and you launched your own loss team. Tell me, you walked away from that a few years ago, I think. Tell me what supporting other loss teams has looked like.
Yeah, I think it's been really cool to see a couple of the teams that I helped start. They were the first team in that state. And so that's really cool because they were so excited to be like, we're the only team in Montana. We're the only team in Wisconsin. I did another one in California as well, of just helping them be able to create a team of resources for the first time to all of these residents. And the coolest stories are like they started a team and people who have never had resources 20 years after their loss are coming forward and saying, can I access those resources? And you're like, it's just really cool to see people all over the spectrum kind of getting the resources they need no matter how long it's been.
Wow.
That's very
Thank
cool.
you. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
I want to shift gears a little bit, but it fits right in with everything we're talking about. This is heavy emotional lifting. This is, you integrate loss into your life. There's not closure. So you engage in this space with other people. You help folks launch teams. You help folks serve the bereaved. What does your own self-care journey look like? And I almost hate that phrase self-care because it's just getting watered down. We hear it way too much. But just being in this traumatic space of loss and suicide, tell me what you do to take care of yourself. What works? What doesn't work?
Yeah, that's a good question. I know that you and I have had this conversation before, Denise. It's like it's like this niche group, right, that you serve. And when you're in this specific little small window, everybody knows you as that person. Like, oh, Brandy, she works with suicide loss. If you have a question, contact her. And I love that people reach out to me still to today, but it becomes a little bit of my emails and my Facebook Messenger and my texts all come to, hey, my friend's neighbor died by suicide today. What resources can I give? Which I really want to give them the resources because I, again, want them to have the resources I never had. But unfortunately, it kind of ends up being where you never get to be off because you always have to be on because suicides happen all the time, right? Unfortunately. Yeah. And so there was a time a few years ago where I remember specifically that I was working for an agency with this loss team, and someone in the office sent out, we ran these support groups that were 12 weeks long, and sent out a placeholder for our calendar, like, this is when it starts, these dates. And I was like, okay, it's on there. And I love doing these support groups. They're so impactful, and it was really cool to lead them. And then right after she sent that, that was for the spring. And then she sent another placeholder for the summer groups right after. And it just in my mind, it felt like just a conveyor belt where we were just like next, not against the agency, but just like there will never be an end to this resource needing to be available. And it felt like a little bit like Groundhog Day, like it was just like next. And
it's a great way to put it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I really did just see this little present. I don't know why, but it was a present that was like getting nicely with a bow on this conveyor belt, and then another one, and then like just by a calendar invite. And I remember thinking, I can't do this every Tuesday, every Thursday, whatever the day, And I remember thinking, it's just the same. I can't have any more conversations about suicide. It just was like at the time I was like on the pediatric death review board. I was the chair of the suicide prevention collaborative. Every conversation I was having was around suicide loss. And at some point I had to say, this is just too much. I'm living my life. I want to be life-giving, not always talking about the darkest days of everyone else's life. And so I did step away. But not so far away because I do want to be a consultant to help other people get that going, but not to be in the trenches every day, I guess would be my self-care of.
How did you unwind from that after you've said yes to 3, 4, 5 different things, facilitator, vice chair, I mean, just all the different things you were doing. How did you unwind from that?
Yeah, it's funny because I stepped down from the chair of the Suicide Prevention Collaborative, and I said, I'll still attend. I'm just not going to lead. And that was, I think, in 22, and I've never been back. And I still get the emails. They're meeting today, actually, right now. And for me, it was just like I've had all the conversations, and I don't need to memorize all the newest statistics or the new, like, that was always at the forefront of my mind. And it doesn't mean I don't care anymore. It doesn't mean any of that, because I'm still so for prevention and all the things we can do for those left behind. But for my own personal sanity, I just had to step back and say, I'm not the savior of the world. There are many people that can step up. It doesn't have to be me every time, you know?
Wow, that's impactful, because it's hard to give yourself permission to do that. Some of us can take on responsibility and feel like I should, and then we end up shoulding all over ourselves, which is really unfortunate. So that's just really impactful. Thank you.
Yeah, we can get that savior complex a lot of times. Of if I don't do it, no one will. Almost that kind of thinking, it can really burn us out quickly.
Yeah, and just that idea of, as you were talking about, it felt like your Facebook Messenger, just different things. When you'd get a message, if it's from somebody you haven't heard from in a couple years, you almost know, before you even open the message. And it's like, it's like, I want to be helpful, and I'm glad people feel like they can approach me. But at the same time, I really just need a break. And you gave yourself permission to step away from some of those things so that you could continue to go at a marathon pace instead of that sprinter. So, wow.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think kind of what you were saying is, who else would step up if not me? No one has to step up until you step down. So you're kind of like this cycle continues. If you're always going to be the one to step up, then no one needs to. But the moment you step down, multiple people stepped up, and they're doing a fantastic job, right? But it's this idea of, if I don't do it, then it'll all fall apart.
Yeah.
I don't think that's true.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
So, Brandy, let me ask you, kind of in summary, if you will, talking to our audience. Many of them are going to be people who are either in the process of starting loss teams or support groups, or they're involved with it. Let's start with loss teams first. What advice would you give them from your experience?
For starting a loss team, or for
starting a loss team? Yeah, let's just keep it simple right now.
keep it simple. I think really having the more people involved, the better. Not having one person lead the whole thing, because it's exhausting work, and I give you 2 months before you're the person who everyone's texting, And so just be able to have the off switch and say, I'm not on this weekend. Someone else is on. Just many hands make light work, I think, is a good adage here.
Yeah.
That's excellent. What about, you've also, like you were talking about, you've experienced doing support groups. What different advice maybe that would you give to somebody they're involved in support groups? Yeah,
I would, like, for attending.
Attending would be a great one, as well as someone who's leading a facilitator of a support group, since you've kind of played both roles.
Sure. For attending, I say that sometimes support groups are the greatest thing on earth, right? And it has changed people's lives and saved people's lives. And sometimes support groups are the worst thing on earth. And I think if you walk in and it's not a good fit, then figure out something else, right? A lot of times people say, I would never step foot in therapy, but support groups are what saved my life. And other people said, I went to a support group and it was awful. And so kept talking and crying, and it's been 20 years and that gives me no hope that this will ever be better. And so I never went back, but instead my therapist and I hashed it out every week on that couch. So I think do what works for you, because
Yes.
it's not a, one size fits all for everyone.
Yeah.
So, and if that therapist that you go to doesn't work, then find another one. Like, we have to be comfortable with saying this doesn't work, and I'm valuable enough to find one that does work. So that's what I would say to folks looking. And then for people leading groups, I think boundaries are always great. Like, for the groups that I led, nobody had my personal phone number, right? Because I can't have all of them, and I was in a therapist role, so, it's a little bit different than maybe a lay person, but just having boundaries, because you aren't the savior of the world, and we want to push people to resources. And I always say, I want to work myself out of a job so that if I were to, die tomorrow, that all the people that I've been working with, they have so many resources that they won't really miss me all that much. Do you know what I mean? Like, they have so many other resources that if I died, it wasn't all dependent on me. And that's what I really feel like support groups need to do too. You want to push them to the other attendees or push them to other resources in town, so that this isn't like the only place that they can find solace.
I love that. I love that. That the idea of a community of hope. It's a community. It's not just a one stop. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's excellent. Well, Brandy, thank you for engaging with this conversation with us today. And Denise, do you have any final thoughts you wanted to ask or say?
I don't. I'm just so grateful to know Brandy. She's one of those people in my life that can normalize some of what I'm feeling without even realizing it, just by being her. So it's really inspiring, and I'm grateful for you, Brandy. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you guys. And thank you for the work that you guys are doing. You guys are top notch.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, as we close out this episode, I want to thank you again, Brandy, for joining us. And as always, a huge thank you to you, our audience, for joining us today. If you like what you heard, please share it with others. And if you haven't done so yet, make sure you subscribe to the podcast. So that way you don't miss any of the episodes. We've got more great content like this coming up, and I can't wait to get into it. You can also do that by going to postventionconsulting.com, clicking on the Hope Debrief at the top of the page, and it'll take you there, and you can subscribe there as well. And as always, thank you again, and we hope to see you again here on the Hope Debrief.